Hi, welcome to Al-Muqaddimah. My name is Syawish. In October 2006, in the famous Regensburg lecture, the then Pope Benedict XVI said, "Show me just what Muhammad brought that was new, and there you will find only evil and inhuman, such as his command to spread by the sword the faith he preached." Now, these were not Benedict's own words. He was quoting the Byzantine Emperor Manuel II, and his own views of Islam weren't quite so negative. However, 1,000 years earlier, in the office that Benedict XVI occupied, there was a man who owed a great deal of debt and had a lot of appreciation for the Islamic world. A predecessor of Pope Benedict XVI, Pope Sylvester II, introduced and reintroduced various of the so-called Saracen sciences to Western Europe. Saracen here meaning Arab or Muslim. If nothing else, he introduced the Hindu-Arabic numerals to Europe, along with other Islamic research in mathematics and astronomy. He also taught his knowledge to his students, who took it further and further. In that way, he represents a very tangible and real bridge from the Islamic world and its golden age to Western Europe and its dark ages. His story also shows the hostility that later intensified between Muslims and Christians, and how he himself got caught in the crossfire when years after his death he was accused of witchcraft and black magic because of his appreciation of the so-called Saracen sciences. In this video, we will discuss the incredible story of one of the most underrated and unknown popes in history. Before we begin, I'd like to tell everyone that my merchandise store is now up on almuqaddimah.com, where you can find awesome wall posters like the Timeline of Islamic History, which condenses more than 1400 years of Islamic history into a beautiful timeline. We also have a map of the fall of Al-Andalus, which shows century by century how Muslim empires lost ground in Spain and Portugal until their eventual collapse on the Iberian Peninsula. So be sure to check it out. That's the best way to support Al-Muqaddimah and show off some love for Islamic history as well. On this channel, we've often talked about the so-called Golden Age of Islam. For those who don't know, the Golden Age of Islam was a period of time when Islamic scholars made great progress in various scientific fields such as mathematics, astrology, medicine, etc. Now, a lot of this research was a continuation of various pre-Islamic scholarly works, which, themselves were continuations of previous works all the way to time immemorial. That's how science works. You stand on the shoulders of those who came before. Muslims brought books from Greece, Syria, Egypt, Iran, and India to cities like Baghdad and translated them into Arabic. They then worked on them further and carried the work forward, writing their own books. These Arabic books were then translated by European scholars who similarly worked on them further, and so on and so forth. Pope Sylvester II played an important role in that transmission from the Islamic world to Europe. Pope Sylvester II was born Gerbert in a small village in southern France known as Aurillac around the year 946 CE. His father may have been a shepherd or a monk, we don't actually know. When he was a boy, the abbot of a monastery nearby stopped in his village and happened to meet the boy. He was impressed by his intelligence and invited him to join the monastery to get a formal education. That's how Gerbert ended up at St. Gerald Monastery in Aurillac. In those days, that was pretty much the only way for a boy of his humble origins to get a good education, and Gerbert would make the best use of his opportunity possible. He learned everything that he could, beginning of course with Latin. Latin was not only the language of religion, but also the language of the classics, which Gerbert would become a big fan of later in his life. He quoted a lot of Latin literature in his letters, for example. At the time, there were 7 liberal arts: grammar, rhetoric, dialectic, arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, and finally music. Gerbert mastered the first three at Aurillac. Not only that, but he also learned some of the more practical skills like bookmaking and metalworking. The monastery had a gold workshop where Gerbert must have acquired his considerable knowledge of working metal. However, by 967 CE, Gerbert had learned everything that he could at Aurillac. He had to leave the monastery to learn more. Around the age of 20 or so, he left the monastery and pretty much everything he knew to pursue further studies in the part of Europe that was, at the point, the most academically advanced, Spain. Gerbert had left Aurillac with the Count of Barcelona, who had come to the monastery for a visit. He went with him to the region of Catalonia. The county of Barcelona was a French possession at the time. Around it were some independent Christian kingdoms, as well as the great Umayyad Caliphate of Cordoba to the south. The city of Cordoba was a beacon of academic research, the likes of which had been very few up to that point. When Gerbert arrived in Catalonia, the Caliph of Cordoba was Al-Hakam II. Both Al-Hakam II and his father, Abdurrahman III, were well-known lovers of knowledge and collectors of books. They were always eager to find new books and have them translated into Arabic, the language of academia in the Islamic world, and add them to their library. They also sponsored many scholars in all kinds of fields, from mathematics to astrology. Cordoba, the capital, was an incredibly beautiful city with beautiful palaces and gardens. It's said that the goldfish in the palace ponds ate around 12,000 loaves of bread a day. It was home to Muslims, Christians, and Jews who lived and worked together in a great display of interreligious harmony. The city was so impressive that the German nun Hrotswit von Gendersheim called it the ornament of the world in 955 CE. Cordoba dispersed its knowledge and research to the rest of Muslim Spain, from where it also reached the Christian kingdoms to the north. This was the perfect academic space for a curious young man like Gerbert. Like I mentioned, Gerbert's patron was the Count of Barcelona, Count Borel. He put him in the tutelage of Bishop Otto of Vic. Gerbert's education there must have contained at least some of the knowledge that came from Muslim Spain. Clear evidence of the fact that northern Spain was indeed in the sphere of Islamic scientific research, the center of which was Cordoba, is Codex Vigilanus, which is the earliest Latin manuscript to contain the Arabic numerals. It was completed in 976 CE, a few years after Gerbert left Spain. Additionally, a source written some 27 years after Gerbert's death clearly states that Gerbert went to Cordoba to learn. While Gerbert doesn't mention this in his letters, it's quite possible that he did. Some scholars believe that he studied in both Cordoba and Seville. But considering that he only lived in Spain for 3 years, what amount of time he spent in Cordoba, if any, is quite difficult to estimate. Additionally, to study in Cordoba or any similar Islamic academic establishment, Gerbert would certainly have had to learn Arabic. For someone as smart as him, it wouldn't have been a problem because there were certainly plenty of people who spoke both Latin and Arabic in Cordoba. But like I mentioned, there's no direct evidence to prove that. This is a matter of great scholarly debate and frankly a lot of speculation. However, he would not have to travel to Cordoba to learn stuff from there. According to the English historian William of Malmesbury, who wrote 100 years after Gerbert's death, he learned everything he knew in Spain from a Saracen whom he stayed with for a while. But William then goes to say that Gerbert made a deal with the devil, so I don't know what to say. One of the schools that he studied at in Catalonia was in the town of Ripoll. Ripoll, in its collection, had a book that's now known as Ripoll 225. It's a collection of treatises on things like geometry and astronomy. In it, there are parts that are direct translations of Ibn Musa al-Khwarizmi's book on astrolabes. Ripoll 225 was not finished until some decades after Gerbert left Catalonia, but there's quite a bit of evidence to suggest that it was not a fully original book. So the translation of al-Khwarizmi must have already existed, likely around the time that Gerbert was in Catalonia. Also, Gerbert's closest friend in Spain, Miro Bonfil, received some education under a Muslim scholar, whom he called the wisest scholar among the Arabs, who may have been one Maslama of Madrid. Now, let me tell you a bit about Muhammad ibn Musa al-Khwarizmi. Al-Khwarizmi was a late 8th century scholar who lived in Baghdad. He did a lot of things in his life, but the most important probably is his work in the field of mathematics. He wrote a book called Kitab al-Mukhtasar fi Hisab al-Jabr wal-Muqabila, shortened to Al-Jabr, from which we get the term algebra. He also introduced the Hindu-Arabic numerals to the Islamic world. Actually, he didn't introduce them, but likely popularized them. In his work, he clearly credits Indian scholars by calling them Hindi numerals, but later Europeans called them Arabic numerals. Al-Khwarizmi was known as Algorizmi in Latin, from which we get the term algorithm. So the point is that during his 3 years in Spain, Gerbert acquired a lot of knowledge that was translated, researched, and transmitted by Islamic scholars. The term Islamic here is being used in a secular rather than religious sense. Many Islamic scholars weren't Muslim after all. Gerbert would then take this knowledge to Rome and other parts of Europe and teach the next generation the Moorish sciences. In 970 CE, Gerbert, with his mentor Otto and the Count of Barcelona, Borel, left Spain to go to Rome. While Otto and the Count returned, Gerbert decided to stick around. He soon found himself in the employ of the Holy Roman Emperor Otto the Great, who wanted him to educate his son, the future Otto II. However, that soon ended. In 972, Otto II got married, and at his wedding, Gerbert met someone who offered him a job at the school attached to the Cathedral of Reims in northern France. Reims was a prestigious educational institute and an intellectual hub, and Gerbert was quick to accept the job. In a few years, Gerbert would become the schoolmaster there. These years of his life were probably the most influential because of the education that he imparted on his students, but also later controversial because of what he taught. During this time, Gerbert almost certainly taught the Hindu-Arabic numerals to his students. In 2001, a copy of Gerbert's Abacus board was discovered, which to its side has 1 to 9 in the Hindu-Arabic numerals. Outside of Spain, this is the earliest known usage of Hindu-Arabic numerals in Europe. This is what the abacus looked like. Gerbert also wrote a poem to help readers memorize the names of the digits. In it, 4, 5, and 8 seem to be using the Arabic names. 4 is written Arbas, which is Arba in Arabic. 5 is written Quimus, which is Khamsa in Arabic. And finally, 8 is written Tamaniyas, which is Thamania in Arabic. From Reims, Gerbert's students took the numerals all over Western Europe. One of his likely students was Bernalinus of Paris, who wrote a manuscript called Liber Abacus. It was written while Gerbert was pope and praises his seminars, so that implies that Bernalinus was a student of Gerbert. Bernalinus wrote one of, if not the first mathematical manuscript to use the Hindu-Arabic numerals in Western Europe, outside of Spain. Different manuscripts of Liber Abacus show variants of the numerals, likely because the numerals were not themselves standardized yet. They also look quite different than what we're used to today. 2 seems to be off by 180 degrees, 3 and 4 are just weird, 5 looks like a 4. 3 is not derived from the Arabic numerals though. It's instead from the Tironian notes, a set of symbols used as shorthands for various Latin symbols and words. For example, instead of the word regis, which means king, this symbol could be used. That's where the 3 in the manuscript comes from. Perhaps Bernalinus didn't want to use the 3 that came from Muslims because 3 is kind of a holy number because, it represents the Trinity, but that's just speculation. Some of the manuscripts show a symbol for 0, which is called sippos. Sippos could come from the Arabic sifr or the Greek siphos. Siphos means pebble and was used to refer to a stone used in voting. But the system was still not universally accepted. It took quite a while for that to happen. Numberphile has a great video on the switch from Roman numbers to the Hindu-Arabic ones in Shakespeare's time in England. However, Gerbert's Abacus and the accompanying numerals became popular within some parts of the church, who used it for their own accounting needs. In addition to mathematics and geometry, Gerbert also taught astronomy at Reims. Gerbert's incredible knowledge of astronomy and in making instrument becomes apparent with his various astronomical instruments. He made instruments to track the heavenly bodies and keep time. While these instruments already existed, Gerbert did make some tweaks to them. One of the tools he mastered was the astrolabe. Astrolabe literally means star holder, and it was an instrument used for a number of things, such as telling time, tracking the stars, etc. One Islamic scholar even claimed that it had 1,760 uses. Astrolabes had existed since the time of the ancient Greeks. In fact, the story goes that Plato, the Greek philosopher, was riding a donkey with a celestial sphere in his hand. The celestial sphere fell and got squashed by the donkey's hooves, which is how the astrolabe was invented. How the donkey would flatten a metal ball is difficult to explain, I guess. People have a very active imagination. But still, the point remains that it goes back to the ancient Greeks, at least. Islamic scholars then pioneered the device, with people like the aforementioned Al-Khwarizmi writing books on it. Like with the Arabic numerals, the Islamic research on astrolabes had traveled to Muslim Spain and to the Christian kingdoms to the north. It's a matter of great debate whether Gerbert actually had access to any Latin translations of the various astronomy books written in the Islamic world. But almost certainly what he learned of astronomy during his time in Catalonia had some influence from the Islamic world. In the 13th century, Gerbert was accused by a man named Michael Scott, not that one, of using necromancy. To prove it, he used the astrolabe as evidence. He writes that Gerbert made demons teach him all the astronomy that he knew. As the author, Nancy Brown, writes, if you substitute Muslims for demons, this story might actually be true. There are two astrolabes associated with Gerbert. One is in Florence and was actually in the possession of the famous Medici family for a while. They believed that it was owned by King Alfonso X of Spain. What's interesting about the astrolabe is that it was produced in the Islamic world and was made to be used in Baghdad. It was pretty much useless for anyone who wasn't living at the same latitude as Baghdad. It also has Arabic inscriptions on it. The second astrolabe is called the Tomb astrolabe. It's the first astrolabe with Latin inscriptions on it and was produced around 986 CE or so in Catalonia, maybe even Barcelona. It also has Arabic numerals on it. Neither of these astrolabes are 100% confirmed to have belonged to Gerbert at any point though. What's certain, however, is that Gerbert used an armillary sphere in his class as visual aid for his students. It was also something that went back to the ancient Greeks at least, but had been lost in Western Europe until the Muslims reintroduced it in Spain. Gerbert likely took the idea of the sphere from there and made improvements on it to fit his needs. Gerbert served as the schoolmaster at Reims till 980 CE. He was called by the Holy Roman Emperor Otto II to Ravenna in Italy in 980. When Gerbert left, his life as a man of science was pretty much over. He was now a man of politics and intrigue, a role that he wasn't really eager to be fulfilling. He would dip his toes back into science and even teaching, but still, he would now become a political figure. Anyhow, he went to Otto's court because the schoolmaster at Magdeburg in Germany, Otto's capital, had made accusations against Gerbert that he was incompetent. Gerbert proved his capabilities in open court, and Otto made him the abbot of the Abbey of Bobbio in northern Italy. The abbot of Bobbio was not just a monk. He was a count in many ways and had all the responsibilities of a count, including providing men when the emperor was to go to war. Gerbert failed to do that and then ended up on the emperor's bad side. He wasn't very good at playing the intrigue game, but luckily for him, the emperor died before he could punish Gerbert. Otto II's death led to chaos in Germany and Italy. Gerbert escaped back to Reims, where he continued to stay and went back to learning and teaching. His letters from the time give us a lot of information about him, his life, and his scientific interests. He discussed things like mathematics and geometry with his friends, as well as asking them for books or sending them books. While at Reims, Gerbert and the Archbishop of Reims, Adalbero of Ardennes, discussed the future of Europe. The Holy Roman Empire was under the rule of Otto III, who was 3 when he became emperor in 983, which had led to chaos that I mentioned before. Both Adalbero and Gerbert dreamed of a Europe united under a single emperor. The Carolingian dynasty, who descended from Charlemagne and had ruled as the kings of the Franks, were in decline, and a new player was rising up, Hugh Capet. Adalbero and Gerbert backed Hugh, and as the leaders of the most important archbishoprics in France, they carried significant weight. Long story short, mostly because I'm in no mood to explain the collapse of the Carolingians, Hugh Capet ended up securing power for himself, thanks in no small part to the Archbishop of Reims. He was crowned Rex Francorum, or the King of the Franks, on the 1st of June 987 CE. Adalbero and Gerbert were now firmly attached to one of the most powerful kings in Europe. Gerbert became Hugh's secretary and the tutor to his son, the future King Robert II. Unfortunately, Adalbero, the Archbishop of Reims, fell ill and passed away in 989. He was the political mind between the two friends, and he was Gerbert's mentor, so Gerbert was a bit out of his depth. Adalbero wanted to be succeeded by Gerbert, but he wasn't chosen by Hugh Capet. He instead became secretary to the new archbishop, Arnaud. Arnaud was the illegitimate half-brother of the last Carolingian king, Louis V. His uncle, Charles, was the active pretender to the Frankish throne and in the middle of an active military struggle against Hugh Capet. Arnaud helped Charles stage an attack on Reims. Gerbert escaped and Hugh was able to take Arnaud and Charles as prisoners. Arnaud, being the archbishop of one of the most important archbishoprics in Europe, couldn't just be punished like a common rebel. Hugh wrote to the Pope, but the Pope never got back to him, so he was publicly humiliated and removed as archbishop, replaced by Gerbert. Gerbert was now the Archbishop of Reims. The Pope didn't like that an archbishop was removed, and many people didn't like that Gerbert was installed. Relations between Hugh Capet and the Pope began to sour. A fierce debate began over who was the Archbishop of Reims, and on a bigger scale, who had the power to choose archbishops. The Pope went all in by excommunicating Gerbert. Even though the French monks were sided with Gerbert being the Archbishop of Reims, the Pope excommunicating him still meant something. Gerbert himself writes that no one ate with him and no one talked to him. He had to leave Reims, and so he met with Otto III to go to Rome and plead his case to the Pope. Otto III was impressed by Gerbert's brilliance and installed him as his secretary. On the road, however, Gerbert and Otto found out that the Pope had passed away. Otto sent his cousin Bruno as the new Pope, Pope Gregory V in 996 CE. Pope Gregory V then elevated Otto III as the new Holy Roman Emperor. Otto and Gerbert spent some time in Rome before returning home. Pope Gregory V, installed by a German army, was soon driven out of Rome once the army left. Otto and Gregory's relationship had soured, and to patch things up, Gregory lifted the excommunication on Gerbert and installed him as the Archbishop of Ravenna, which was second to only the Church of Rome in Italy. A year later, in 999 CE, Pope Gregory V died, possibly of suspicious circumstances or malaria. Otto III knew who was going to be the next pope: his secretary, mentor, and friend, Gerbert of Aurillac. Gerbert was installed as Pope Sylvester II on April 2nd, 999 CE. His term as Pope was pretty routine. There were some political problems still, and the Roman public revolted, which led to Sylvester having to flee to Ravenna. Otto III tried to take Rome back, but failed and passed away on January 23rd, 1002, at age 21. Sylvester returned to Rome and continued serving as the Pope until his death on the 12th of May, 1003 CE. As Pope, he doesn't seem to have done much or indeed any work in scientific fields, except he did discuss such things with his friends in his letters. Some scholars at the time were scared that as the year 1000 comes around, Satan will be unleashed on earth and the world will come to an end. Later writers seem to have exaggerated this fear, however. Sources from the time don't seem so sensational about the apocalypse. There was a lot of apocalyptic stuff, of course, in Sylvester's writings, but not related to the year 1000. It was more to do with the idea of rebuilding the Roman Empire, uniting the East and the West under the Christian cross, which would, of course, eventually lead to the return of the Christ and the whole end of days series of events that we read about. Although sadly for him, that never came about. Even Western Christians weren't united, much less both Western and Eastern Christians. Roughly 5 decades after his death, the East and the West would be split permanently in the Great Schism. Pope Sylvester II is one of the most legendary figures, not only in the history of the Catholic Church, but also in the history of Western Europe itself. He was a wonderful and remarkable person, that we can say for sure, but there was so much written about him long after his death that his real personality becomes a bit blurry. There are all these stories of wonderful inventions that he created through the help of demons. There's even talks of a mechanical computer that nodded yes or no, but it's very difficult to establish what's real and what's mere fantasy. A mechanical computer wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility, frankly, if we limit what we mean by a computer. It was no ChatGPT, that's for sure. There was a lot of work being done in the field of mechanics in the Islamic world, after all. In my opinion, Pope Sylvester II's story represents something of a lost idea, that of collaboration between the Islamic East and the Christian West. A century after his death, another pope would declare war on the Muslims of the Middle East and order Christians to march and liberate Jerusalem. The Crusades painted a lot of how Muslims and Christians saw each other and even continue to see each other today. In the same way, Gerbert of Aurillac's own story was changed. His appreciation and transmission of the so-called Saracen sciences was considered a heretical act. The aforementioned William of Malmesbury clearly accused him of practicing the dark arts even as pope, and he then goes on to say that Gerbert was full of sorrow over his misdeeds on his deathbed. There were rumors of him having kept an Arab witch as his mistress while he was in Spain. He was largely disowned by many later Christians as a collaborator of demons and the master of the dark arts. In the Assassin's Creed universe, he was the head of the Templars. However, that image changed quite recently when he was reclaimed by Christians and the Church as a brilliant man of science and a great educator. Although Hungarians have always loved him because he crowned King Stephen, the first king of Hungary. Even today, when someone writes fantasy inspired by medieval legends, Gerbert tends to make an appearance. Here he is being portrayed as a vampire in the series A Discovery of Witches. With Gerbert's death, a world did indeed end. Things changed dramatically between the year 1000 and 1100. He himself played a role in the end of the Carolingians, the descendants of Charlemagne, which led to the rise of the House of Capet in France, one of the longest ruling dynasties in the world. This ended any kind of potentially united Christian European empire, at least until the 20th century. The churches in Rome and Constantinople forever split apart. The Umayyad Caliphate, which was a beacon of light and knowledge, fell to infighting and puppet masters. Cordoba's prestige took a sharp left turn as rebellions circled the once great city. In addition to that, 2 acts of violence against Christian holy sites also damaged Muslim-Christian relations greatly. In 997 CE, Al-Mansur, the vizier and de facto ruler of the Umayyad Caliphate of Cordoba, sacked the holy shrine of Santiago de Compostela. In 1009, on the other side of the sea in the middle, Fatimid Caliph Al-Hakim destroyed the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. All of it culminated in the Crusades, where the Christians would return the violence with interest. The Crusades permanently soured Muslim-Christian relations and damaged the Byzantine Empire to the point that the Muslim Ottomans eventually destroyed it and took over the last remnants of the Roman Empire. See you next time. Don't forget to subscribe and press the bell icon. On the screen right now, you can see the names and tiers of the patrons. You can join them by pledging $1 or more to support the channel. Thank you for watching.